Let's get into this conversation now. Some areas in eThekwini are still without water following the devastating floods over the past 3 weeks. KwaZulu-Natal Premier Sihle Zikalala saying residents in urban and rural areas are still experiencing irregular or no running water at all. Joining me now is the head of eThekwini Water and Sanitation, Ednick Msweli. Mr. Msweli, thank you very much for your time. Are you able to give us an update on the areas that are still badly affected when it comes to the supply of water? Some people simply have no access to water at all, while others have intermittent supply.
Thank you, Tolly, and good morning to the viewers at home. I think I must start perhaps with the good news that we've recovered quite a large part of the city now. If I gave an overall figure, I would say around 70% or so of the city is recovered. The one area that is giving us sort of a difficult time will be Tongaat because of the extent of the damage that happened in that particular area. In Tongaat, we had a dedicated waterworks that was supplying the Tongaat area. So that waterworks was really seriously damaged. And to repair that is going to take months. So that's really been the hardest part of the city that we have to deal with. In that we understand the frustration. People want water in their taps now. So when you go to them and say you have to wait 5 months, I think it's quite hard to swallow that. But that is the reality with Tongaat, but we are looking at other interventions that we can implement. Unfortunately, even those need serious looking at, because an example of that is a treatment works in Mvoti that was mothballed. It was no longer in use. It was not needed by Ilembe district municipality. So if we were to find a solution that would keep the people in Tongaat going for the next 5 months, we would have to look at resuscitating that particular works. But even that, we're not sure whether it can be done any quicker than going back to the original treatment works that was damaged. Yeah. So we are still looking at that, trying to find the quickest solution that can restore supply to that particular area. So for now, until then, unfortunately, it's water tankers, sort of boreholes and static tanks.
Yeah. Let's focus the attention for a moment on the Tongaat area. You're saying that the waterworks system there completely damaged. Who is the bulk supplier there, and what are they finding to be the major issue?
Well, in this particular instance, the bulk supplier would be the city, because we were running that waterworks. We've employed some consultants because we were busy with the upgrade of their particular works anyway, even before the storm disaster happened. So we already had consultants that were on site, busy with that upgrade. So we asked them to do an assessment for us, and they've come back with a report. Nearly everything there is destroyed. You would have to go back and fix everything in that particular works. The 5-month program comes from that assessment. They've told us that the earliest you can get it to work, if you started today, would be 4 to 5 months. And this is why we are saying we are then exploring other options, because it's hard to say to the people of Tongaat, you have to wait 5 months before you can get water in your taps.
Yeah.
So later today, I would have some answers regarding this option of Mvoti works, whether that in itself is feasible or not. If that is not feasible, then really we do have a challenge in our hands.
Yeah.
We then have to continue with water tankers, unfortunately.
It's absolutely devastating to hear you say that nearly everything is destroyed in this waterworks, or the bulk supplier that supplies the area of Tongaat. Yes, on the one hand, we understand that this was a natural disaster, meaning that you had an inordinate amount of water that was hitting the city like never seen before. I think the president made the example that this is perhaps a number of years worth of water in just a few hours. However, Mr. Msweli, there is the ongoing criticism about the neglect of infrastructure, particularly in the area of eThekwini. This was, in fact, an ongoing debate or public discourse about infrastructure, water infrastructure in eThekwini even before the flood disaster happened. Why have you neglected infrastructure?
Look, I think it's a case of resources, because we've indicated that we would need to spend at least 1.6 billion minimum every year in order to resuscitate and upgrade the infrastructure to the level that it should be. Now, the city does not have that kind of money, that 1.6 billion. So we've prioritized infrastructure that we thought was critical and upgraded that just so that you minimize downtime in terms of water supply. As I indicated, that Tongaat, fortunately, that particular works was one of those that we had prioritized, and we were already working on upgrading the infrastructure for Tongaat. But it's a fact that we need really a lot of money to go back and upgrade infrastructure for the city of eThekwini. The infrastructure is old. There was recently a pipe that failed, and when we went to check our records, it was 66 years old. That is quite old. So we do have a lot of infrastructure like that, and it's something that the city has acknowledged, but it's a case, of priorities, because the city doesn't deal with water and sanitation only. It also has other priorities to deal with, and the resources are limited.
Yeah.
But it's a fact, one cannot deny that. The infrastructure is old, it does need to be replaced.
Indeed. And when you do check your records, not only does it tell you that infrastructure is old, but did it tell you about efforts to try and maintain it, and whatever monies went in there, were they used for the particular purpose, or was it stolen?
Well, it was used for the purpose, and I'm basing that on what I know. I'm not aware of any monies being stolen. I just know about work being done. We have our teams, they are working. We spend money on maintenance, we spend money on materials, most of it, I should say. One can never discount, instances of perhaps corruption. It happens in any institution. But I wouldn't say that's the big problem that we're dealing with. We are working, we are maintaining the infrastructure, but you can only maintain it up to a point. When it's so old, it collapses.
Yeah.
You've got to replace it.
Well, let's try and stay with the subject of corruption for a moment. As you would have heard the President address Parliament a few days ago, saying that it's embarrassing that at a time when the country is supposed to be discussing a disaster that has befallen KwaZulu-Natal, the most important topical debate is about monies that are going to start flowing there, not falling into the hands of those it should not fall into. The water tankers that are doing the rounds right now, are those tankers owned by the city? And if they are owned by the city, what safeguards are there to make sure that the money that is paid over for these tankers to do the rounds in the various communities, those monies are protected?
Yes, some of those water tankers are owned by the city. The city owns about 132 water tankers. So part of the fleet is council owned. And all of those have tracking devices. So we track them, and we have a fleet management system that can tell us how they're being utilized. But there's no opportunity really for corruption much, because they're already owned by the city. The city also hires water tankers. We were doing that even prior to the storm. We've been hiring about 52 water tankers. We manage those. Obviously, we've got our own staff that stay close to those to make sure that we're getting value for money. But what has happened with the storm, the Minister of Water and Sanitation established a war room. And this is an item that war room meets every day, every morning, 8 o'clock. And this is the first item we discuss every morning at 8 o'clock, is to look at all the water tankers that are available, because some of them have been donated by the departments, like Department of Culture, they've donated, I think, about 7. Department of Water and Sanitation, about 50. And when I say donated, it's in the form of those departments hiring water tankers and giving them to us to use. So one of the things we've insisted on the hired tankers is that they must also have trackers, so that we can verify that indeed they were there, they worked, And on the department, I can talk for the Department of Water and Sanitation, for example. They even have paper trail that they've created specifically for this storm that would ensure that the driver records the location of where he delivered the water. Somebody signs off for that load of water. So you're going to that level to just try and make sure that there's little chance for any corruption with the provision of water tankers.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Msweli, I'm really sorry to belabor the point around corruption, but it is unfortunately the cancer that is eating away at the soul of our country. If I were to come to you in a week or 2 weeks' time and I ask you to tell me whether any of those tankers are owned by politicians, particularly those that are hired by the city, who are these tankers hired from? Do you know the companies that have hired out these tankers to the city?
I cannot talk for the other departments, but from the city side, up until the end of April, we had a panel that we had for the hiring of water tankers. And I don't know here, see if I'm at liberty to mention company names. I don't have their permission. But in that panel, we had about 4 service providers, and of which I think for some time we were using about 2 or 3 of those. I think one of them had a challenge in terms of availability of tankers. So when the storm disaster started, we just continued using that panel so that you had rates. Otherwise, you would have had to then go out on tender again to get new rates. So that particular panel was still valid, and we used that.
Yeah.
So it was not a new process for the storm.
All right.
But the provincial departments and national departments, I think they underwent their own procurement processes. And yes, they also using one of the service providers they're using is one that we are also using. I am not aware of any involvement of politicians in the process. We've only been interacting with officials.
Okay. All right. Hopefully in a week's time when I come back to you, you're saying that there are 4 service providers that are working with the city for the moment. Hopefully, if I come back to you, you'll be able to tell me exactly who the owners of these water tankers are. Final question to you. The Umvoti waterworks, which was mothballed, why was that decision taken at whatever time it was taken? Why the decision to mothball Umvoti?
That particular works belongs to Ilembe District Municipality, and we were told through the war room, because they are part of the war room, and I happen to chair the war room, that it was costly to run it at the time, and I think they would have had to also spend a lot of money upgrading it. And the water that was available from another works, in this case Hazelmere Works, was sufficient to meet the demand up until now. So they could have survived without it. It was costly and they didn't really need it. But now that we don't have Tongaat works, that Umvoti works is about 10 megaliters, just to put in perspective, 10 megaliters a day. Tongaat works, we were taking about 16 megaliters a day. So we now have a shortfall. And we are starting to look at that works and to say, shouldn't we bring it back online now? So it's like we need it now, but we didn't need it before the storm disaster.
Yeah, makes sense. All right, that's where we're going to leave that conversation. Thank you very much for your time, Mr.